Support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum. Located in Jennings City Hall, the museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is a historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. Additional support provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
If we can't get behind the American flag and our anthem and just the United States in general, then we'll never be able to settle and agree on some of the harder issues.
Fallout against the New Orleans Saints and player protests during the national anthem.
You think about how massive a response but will be required.
Could Energy Louisiana play a role in helping hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico amid their humanitarian crisis? Hi, everyone. I'm Andre Morrow. In a moment, more on the Saints anthem controversy and the crisis facing Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. But right now on the state we're in, other stories making headlines. A standing ovation on Capitol Hill Thursday for Congressman Steve Scalise, the House Majority Whip from Louisiana, who was shot in June at a congressional baseball team practice. This was his first time back on the Hill since being seriously injured.
When I was laying out on that ball field, the first thing I did once I was down and I couldn't move anymore is I just started to pray. And I will tell you, it gave me an unbelievable sense of calm, knowing that at that point it was in God's hands.
Scalise says he's a living example that miracles do happen. Louisiana ranks high on a list that tugs at your heart and that can also be linked to other problems that plague the state. Hunger. Bread for the World, an anti-hunger watchdog group, released the top 10 hungriest states in America. Mississippi ranks at the top with 18.7% of households struggling to provide food for family members at some point during the year. We are a close second at 18.3%. The group says families are not always hungry, but at times find themselves unsure where their next meal will come from. The three lead Republican candidates for state treasurer made their first joint appearance at a candidates forum held by the Baton Rouge Press Club. Their answers to policy questions had a similar ring. Louisiana's treasurer has a megaphone to sound off about the state's financial issues, but the job does not come with much power to fix them.
Our state is facing significant challenges, and we need people to come together, to work together, to solve the problems of our state. And we also need to do a better job of informing our taxpayers where their dollars are being spent.
The biggest problem we face as a state is two problems. One, our spending habits, and two, public education. Those are the two fronts that I've spent all of my time on as a leader in the legislature.
So I think that we need a treasurer that can work with everyone, not just one individual. My record is clear. I have a clear conservative voting record, the most conservative voting record of anyone in this race. At the same time, though, I'm able to work across the aisle with anyone.
The only Democrat in the field, Derek Edwards of New Orleans, was a no-show. The election primary is October 14th. Controversy marred a televised debate among what was supposed to pit the top four candidates running for mayor of New Orleans. Businessman Sidney Torres, not a candidate, but whose voice pack group sponsored the debate, got hot when candidate Desiree Charbonnet dropped out at the last minute. He's now threatening to launch a round of TV ads against her. Who was there? Troy Henry, LaToya Cantrell, and Michael Bagneris. City infrastructure problems like city and sewerage issues, and New Orleans police took the headlines of the affair. None of the three pointed fingers at one another, and all stuck to basic talking points during the 90-minute debate. Governor John Bel Edwards grabbed headlines when he described himself as almost agnostic about which approach the state uses to gain long-term financial stability, meaning any approach that fixes the problem is an approach he could be okay with. Edwards is looking for a tax package in the majority Republican legislature. He told a lunch group in Baton Rouge he'd support any mix of ideas for a tax overhaul recommended by the nonpartisan study group created last year by lawmakers. The group offered a long list of ideas to rewrite sales, business, and personal income tax laws. And now to the Saints. Their first victory of the season caught in the crosshairs of what happened before they even took the field to defeat the Carolina Panthers 34-13. About a dozen Saints were among 200 NFL players who did not stand during the national anthem before football games played this past weekend. Players say the demonstrations were not meant to be unpatriotic or disrespectful to military, but instead to draw attention to police brutality affecting the black community and other discrimination against minorities. The escalation of those protests were in direct results to remarks made by President Donald Trump at a rally in Alabama. He demanded that football players who did not stand during the anthem be fired. He then continuously tweeted about it and urged fans to boycott NFL games. The Saints, like other NFL teams, rallied in unity with their owners and one another, but it caused a ripple effect of reaction.
I support the First Amendment and the players' rights to protest. First of all, the NFL doesn't allow as many protests. That they won't allow them to write stuff on their shoes. They won't allow them to express themselves the way, they pick and choose. So that's an NFL issue right there. I believe that if there's going to be a state subsidy sporting event, that it should be free of political protest. Not saying they can't protest, but do it not on the field, not during the anthem. I think it was just in poor taste.
Kenny talks about the players being political, and an entity that receives state dollars shouldn't be political. We have multiple corporations that engage in political activity that receive dollars from the state. We have corporations who donate to our campaigns and receive subsidies from the state. Let's put all of it on the table, right? Let's have a real conversation. But the truth of the matter is, Kenny doesn't agree with the type of protest.
Governor Edwards, a West Point graduate, believes there are more effective ways for the Saints and other pro teams to protest social inequality. But the governor does not believe state funding or incentives can be pulled from teams over objections to the demonstrations. Now, the governor is also urging all of Louisiana to take part in a statewide donation drive to help survivors of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. Maria blasted the island with Cat 4 and 5 winds just a week after the island nation was brushed by Cat 5 Hurricane Irma. Using the hashtag Maria, go to gov.louisiana.gov/Puerto Rico to offer help. Late Wednesday, the White House authorized a waiver to the Jones Act to loosen shipping rules and get more help more quickly to Puerto Rico. Meantime, most of the island remains in the dark. These are satellite photos taken before and after. They show how Maria's fury wiped out Puerto Rico's power grid. First there was Harvey, then Irma, and then Maria, all leaving catastrophic results. Maria has left Puerto Rico crying for help. These major hurricanes all impacting the U.S. and U.S. territories, and in Puerto Rico's case, largely without power, fuel, water, food, a humanitarian crisis. With me now, Philip May, the CEO, President of Energy, and Dane Smith, Regional Manager of Customer Service for Energy. Thank you so much for joining us. My first question is, as the heads of an energy company, is there anything you guys can do to help get the power back on in Puerto Rico?
I think first of all, we recognize that electricity is the most critical resource. Without electricity, restoration really doesn't begin. Oftentimes communication systems are down, water systems, sewer systems, those types of things may not be operating. So getting the power up is that first critical step to that restoration. Specifically to your request, we understand the federal government has a massive response that is ongoing. In order for us to help, we first need to have a request and need to be able to support that request in terms of logistics, places to stay, and so forth. But we stand willing to and able to serve when that request comes.
You have an airport infrastructure that is barely working, hospitals that don't, but when you get down to it, if you don't have power or access to power or fuel for generators or the things that you could even have temporary power, you're going to have a major problem. And 97% of Puerto Rico, as we speak, is offline right now with power.
It is an enormous challenge, no doubt, but I think that when you go through a restoration like this, Dane and I, both veterans from Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, all of the storms we've had in the past, I think you need to measure restoration incrementally. Are we doing better today than we did yesterday, and focusing on what we're going to get done tomorrow? You certainly want your life to be back to normal as quickly as possible, but it's really about focusing on those incremental steps and that restoration of critical infrastructure.
Would you say the U.S. is doing enough, though, as you look at it right now? I mean, when you're talking about people who their next breath may be their last, when you're talking about a crisis, it's so enormous, it's hard for us to imagine. But people who were in Katrina, it's not hard for them to imagine.
Right, as I said, we went through Katrina and we understand what our friends in Puerto Rico are going through. I don't really know the specifics of what the response is at this time. I do know it's going to be a massive undertaking. When Katrina occurred just on the Gulf Coast, nearly 50,000 workers came in just focused on restoration of energy infrastructure and electricity and so forth.
So let's talk a little bit about what you guys did do, certainly knowing firsthand what a calamity is like in Louisiana from repeated blows we've taken from storms, whether they be floods or hurricanes or whatever natural disaster it would be, but the aid that energy brought to Texas, for Harvey, which was the first big one, and then all of a sudden there's Irma going right up Florida.
It's important to know that electric utilities are part of an agreement for mutual assistance. And we know that, particularly in Louisiana and Florida, we are exposed to tropical storm risk. And because of that, we consistently and constantly train and prepare for these kinds of events. But under no circumstances can you retain enough resources to deal with something on the scale of Irma. And because of that, we have these agreements that allow companies to request and have us provide resources.
Region manager for customer service, people needed customer service. They still do, I suppose.
That's right.
In the aftermath of all this.
That's right. Yeah, we were able to provide, from Entergy, we were able to provide about 1,000 restoration workers to assist with the restoration efforts in Irma in Florida. About 500 of those came from Louisiana, and we were glad to help. You know, our people have a heart for service. This is what they're good at. This is what we enjoy doing. So we were glad to go and help out.
As bad as Harvey was, and it was catastrophic as we watched for days and days and days, Texas underwater and the Beaumont Orange area really walloped after Metro Houston was. What's the state of that situation now? Power, I'm assuming, is back on largely, but thousands and thousands of homes are just beginning to be dismantled at this point, I would think.
Right, so anytime we have an event like Harvey, Irma, those types of things, each storm has its unique challenges and so forth. In the case of Harvey, it was clearly an issue of the volume of rainwater and rising flood water that occurred. When we have an event, we prepare. For instance, in Louisiana, we place these things called tiger dams, basically plastic tubes you fill with water.
They're used along Grand Isle, isn't it?
Exactly, and you put those in place to protect your infrastructure. In the case of Louisiana, those were very effective at protecting our infrastructure, substations, that kind of thing. In the case of Texas, the sheer volume was too much. They had 7 substations that were massively damaged by the water, even with that mitigation in place. In fact, one substation we had was 8 feet above flood grade. We had 5 feet of water in the substation. So obviously it's going to take a long time to repair that. All those customers in Texas who can take power have power. Ultimately, as you repair your homes, those folks who had massive damage to their home will have to repair the home, have inspections, and then before we can restore power, make sure that it's safe to restore power to their home. Okay. But that process is ongoing.
Have you ever, though, responded in an area that's not in the mainland U.S., such as Puerto Rico? Has there ever been a response that you've been called upon as an energy company to tackle?
Yeah, I'm not aware, Dane, you may be, I'm not aware of anything outside of the continental United States where we responded.
I'm not aware of any Entergy response. I know some mainland utilities have responded for various weather events in the past through the Southeastern Electric Exchange that we work through.
So that could be a first, perhaps, if it comes to that, if there's a way to do that.
So long distance response is not new, and I think Sandy set a new record because we actually had U.S. government C-130s fly in bucket trucks from California to respond to Sandy. So we won't be setting a new precedent here, but that kind of response is a new and very challenging logistical set of things you have to deal with.
Okay, let us know if something happens that we haven't heard of first. Please let us know. And thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks for all you do.
By the way, Entergy is the only U.S. utility to win Edison Electric Emergency Response Awards since they began giving them 19 years ago. Now, in Puerto Rico tonight is General Russell Honore of Louisiana, the take charge man who turned around New Orleans in the wake of the Katrina disaster. He says our response has to be better than it's been. I spoke with him just before he left about helping people desperate for help.
They're doing the right thing, they're just doing it slow. And that's the recommendation. And you notice I'm not using the word criticism. It's a recommendation. They got to be able to do this quicker and mobilize the federal troops quicker. We learned that in Katrina.
General Honore tonight in Puerto Rico to offer his boots on the ground assistance there. A frustrated Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy put a period for now on the latest plan to repeal the Affordable Care Act. The hope and repeal and replace of health care shelved because they didn't have the support necessary to move on. It ended a tough couple of weeks for those touting the Graham-Cassidy health care bill, especially for Cassidy. He heard comedian Jimmy Kimmel go after him, saying that Cassidy lied to his face about the repeal plan and its benefits. Kimmel also listed the numerous health alliances nationally that are against the plan, like the American Heart Association and American Cancer Association.
Through events that are under our control and not under our control, we don't have the votes. Okay? That's in speaking to the leadership, speaking to the president. I think Lindsay and he are on speed dial. We've made the decision, since we don't have the votes, we will postpone that vote. Okay? Am I disappointed? Absolutely. It isn't disappointment for myself. Just today, there is an eHealth.com report that the average family of three making $82,000 a year, 401% of federal poverty level, will be paying $29,000 per year for their policy, which means officially, according to the ACA, they cannot afford. That isn't just a few families, it is the average family of three making $82,000 a year. And when folks spoke that we didn't define affordability, well, the ACA has a definition for affordability, and no one can afford it. I'm also disappointed for state legislators, where we heard yesterday that Pennsylvania has a gap in their state legislature. News reports that Michigan will, Louisiana does. I can go down the list. We were going to give them relief. We will not be able to, and that's too bad for state legislatures. And lastly, is for those working families in non-expansion states like Texas, Utah, Maine, Virginia, Missouri, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Utah, I could go down the list, who right now don't have access to the dollars that would give them coverage. We're going to give them access to the health care screens, the health care treatment that they otherwise will not have. I'm also disappointed for them. So those who will celebrate the fact that we won't have that vote just yet, think of those families of three making 401% of federal poverty level, those states, and those patients in those non-expansion states. As you celebrate, they are not celebrating, they are mourning. But we'll keep working at it. Our Democratic friends said if we just give them a chance, they'll now be bipartisan. They'll now have that chance to be bipartisan. Thank you very much.
Senator Bill Cassidy. And next, let's look at some state politics. Officials are preparing for a big debate on tax reform that will play out in the spring. LPB's Kelly Spires is here with more on that. Kelly?
That's right. Lawmakers have a looming deadline for when a large set of temporary taxes will expire. That will cause a revenue shortfall of about $1 billion and about a $9.5 billion budget with state dollars. I sat down with veteran Associated Press Capitol reporter Melinda DeLotte. So the next session doesn't start until March. Can you explain to me why we're seeing budget negotiations and tax reform popping up in headlines in the fall?
We have a very giant budget hole that is coming with the start of the next fiscal year on July 1st, 2018. So we have it's more than $1 billion. We have a bunch of temporary, mainly sales taxes that are expiring at the start of the next fiscal year. And the legislature, when they passed those temporary taxes last year, the assumption was that they were going to deal with finding some means of replacing them in the 2017 legislative session. That came and went, they didn't do it. So it's just kind of this lingering problem.
We saw earlier this week Governor Edwards meet with business leaders in Baton Rouge, and he's had several meetings with business leaders across the state. Why take that route?
Because a lot of the opposition to his previous tax plans came from business organizations. So the governor and his budget advisors are trying to spend more time on what they believe is educating business groups and business leaders and the actual business officials on the ground, as opposed to the organizations, about how the fiscal cliff was created, what goes into it, and then soliciting ideas for what they might be willing to accept in terms of taxes to deal with it.
Now, there has been a plan kind of outlining several options, and that was, I don't know, has been offered in different forms for several years. Is there anything new?
Whether it deals with sales taxes or tax exemption programs or the corporate tax structure or personal income taxes, all those ideas have been out there. They've all been kind of in the ether being discussed, and nobody seems to have agreed on anything. Now that the deadline is imminent, can they suddenly agree on something they have been unable to agree upon?
According to the rules, there's one committee in the House that all tax proposals have to originate in. What has this committee said in the past about these ideas, and how do they feel about it?
It's a very conservative, majority Republican committee. First go around, all those ideas were considered, and if they got a vote at all, they were rejected, but some of the sponsors of those bills just pulled them from a vote because it was inevitable they were going to get killed.
What is House leadership saying about where we'll be in the spring?
The House Speaker has gone around the state to meet with individual House members, either individually or in groups, but to kind of reach out to the whole body, because obviously tax bills have to start in his chamber. So he's trying to find some consensus on what the House, Democrat and Republican, is willing to do, what he can get a majority of votes for, because some bills need 53 votes, some bills need 2/3 vote, which is 70 votes in the House. No consensus so far.
You mentioned earlier that they planned on doing everything in 2017, and that's because fiscal measures can't be taken up in even-numbered years. What are they planning on doing?
If they're going to deal with taxes and not just do entirely budget cuts to adjust the fiscal cliff figure, they would actually have to have a special session. The governor has talked about having one in February before the regular session starts, but he has said that he's not going to do that unless the House has reached some consensus about what taxes they might support, because he doesn't want to have another session that costs taxpayers money when nobody's agreed on anything. So there could either be a February session and then they would spend the money in March, or it could be when they come into the regular session, they spend that whole session cutting the budget for the $1 billion and then try to come in a special session after that to raise some money to fill the gap.
Thanks for coming, Melinda.
Thanks for having me.
And LPB, of course, will have continuing coverage on the budget and tax reform debate as it unfolds.
Yes, we will, Kelly. Thanks so much for that. Very interesting.
Well, it is called American Made, and it's a story of Louisiana-born pilot Barry Seal and his high-flying life that ended in assassination at a Salvation Army halfway house in Baton Rouge in 1986. The movie is now open in theaters nationwide, and Tom Cruise stars in what is being described as a very dark comedy.
This is the United States Drug Enforcement Agency. We are ordering you to land. All right, boys, let's land. Easy.
My name's Barry Seal.
That's for the damage. For your sister, hey, little darling, and your back.
That's part of the movie trailer. This is investigative news video detailing the story as it happened after Seal's death in 1986, and beforehand, of course. It tells of how Seal went from airline pilot to major drug smuggler to informant before Escobar contract killers murdered him. American Made is rated R. And that is our show for this week. Remember, you can watch LPB on demand on your phone or tablet with our LPB Anywhere app. The download is free from your app store. You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows as well as other Louisiana programs that you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook as well. For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow. Thanks for watching. Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and visit lpb.org, where you can view more stories and leave us a comment. This program is available on DVD. Support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum. Located in Jennings City Hall, the museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is a historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. Additional support provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.